Welcome to the American Intelligence Media. I am your host, Douglas Gabriel, and today I'm speaking with Michael McKibben about Herr Mueller's testimony before the Congress. And I'm getting scared, but you know what? I predict that's a dog and pony that ain't got no more tricks. And you just got through telling me that the Department of Justice told him he can't say anything outside of what he's already said. So why is he even coming except to completely defame himself so that no one ever says again that he has integrity, because his report is literally criminal. All it states is that he created a criminal act. There was no crime. He used $40 million just on his side. That's just his side. And I keep pointing out, then there's the government side, which they're not even adding up. And there was already, that's the seventh investigation of Trump and for that same exact thing. So, what does this guy have to say? He should just shut up and go home. So anyway, that's my initial opinion. As you know, I've harped on this a lot, but we want to hear what you have to say, Michael, especially...
Well, what do you think about this, Douglas?
What do I think about this? I think I want to hear... Here's what I think about it. Mueller got three whores, right? Stormy Daniels, Horseface, and remember, we should call him Muleface, Herr Mueller, or Witch Hunter Mueller, or Muleface, whatever you want, anything derogatory, because the Democrats are a little bit upset, the demon rats, that we aren't pronouncing his name the way they want us to pronounce it. And no matter how we pronounce it, they'll say it's the other one. But anyway, he's going to come and he's going to do nothing. And he did nothing in his report. It was a waste of time. All it did was cover the tracks of the guilty. But he won't be able to answer any questions that he hasn't already revealed either in the report or through his two stupid press conferences. But you put out a report recently and have more to report on the British connection for this Spygate. Remember, this thing is called Crossfire Hurricane, the Committee to Impeach Trump, the small committee, the small group. Then it turned into, of course, the Crossfire Hurricane. I already said that, Crossfire Hurricane, and then it turned into, of course, the Mueller Special Counsel investigation. Same thing, and they admit that. Now, I want to point out one detail that nobody seems to notice. Comey said to the world 6 times, 3 times under testimony, 3 times in public, and also 3 times to Trump personally, that he wasn't under investigation. Well, he was. Those are all lies. So we knew, and we predicted. When we saw him perjure himself 3 times over this, we predicted that he wanted to get fired so there could be a special counsel investigation, a grand jury investigation over the nonsense that they've trumped up about Trump. And that's exactly what happened. We predicted that before it even happened. And then we predicted who they would choose because, of course, Mueller is the mentor for Comey, always has been. And for 12 years, he ran this country from the debacle of the 9/11 Commission investigation, Oklahoma bombing. Remember his good friend John Brennan was there at the Riyadh bombing these guys are so crooked.
Tanzania and Kenya embassy bombings.
Please, would you get into the British side? And I'm not going to say her name because I want you to say a few of her names.
Well, you asked me what I thought. You started to ask me what I thought about this testimony, and I guess at the 60,000 foot view, it's very depressing to watch our government take our tax dollars and organize all this political theater. Clearly, I just heard today that the Democrats got together and were practicing their questions for this testimony, which is very odd because if we have representatives who are representing us and supposedly seeking the truth, then what do they have to rehearse? So that's one question. But the larger issue for me is the FBI, and we're all children of our backgrounds and all the propaganda that has been put out our whole lives about the FBI, and we were taught to respect the FBI. Remember Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. and the TV show The FBI. So my whole career, I've respected the FBI. or had that view. But what we're now learning from all this research into the involvement of the British in our government is showing me that the FBI has been nothing but domestic intelligence and more of the same lining of pockets of the banking interests who are aligned with the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, the GCHQ, informally in World War II, the SOE and the SIS, and you name it, all these acronyms, the U.S. Army Security Agency. And what we're seeing now is, we will see tomorrow, is the latest representatives in a long line of representatives of the FBI who, since the 1946 agreement that created Five Eyes with the British, our FBI, in fact, there are documents that we just have recently seen and uncovered that show that the FBI was actually assigned to activities involving sabotage within the borders of the U.S. So what we're learning about the actual activities of the FBI is totally different than the propaganda that we have been fed our whole lives. So to me, this is extremely disappointing as an American, as somebody who believed we have a republic. And what we now are learning is that our FBI, our DOJ, our State Department are utterly corrupt organizations. And what we are going to no doubt see tomorrow is an alignment of those who want to continue to support this lie, as opposed to those who are trying to dig and get to the truth so that we can move our country to a new level of development.
Absolutely. Because we have a Department of Injustice, and we have a Federal Bureau of Non-Investigation, a Federal Bureau of Covering the Trails, of a cover-up. These are people who are criminals working for the senior executive service. They are what we call the shadow government. They are not fake. We don't make this up. It's not a conspiracy. This is how it's done. And if you've followed us, you know it's true. We've given you all the evidence. We were the first ones to call Mueller out. First ones to show that he is the king of hiding exculpatory evidence, which is exactly what this entire fake investigation is about, hiding exculpatory evidence that shows that Trump is 100% innocent.
In 1992, Mueller and one of the guys was on the Trump-Russia hoax, and Kenneth Starr pushed through the Supreme Court a decision that allowed prosecutors to withhold exculpatory evidence in a criminal case. Now, that was Mueller's doing with Kenneth Starr. So what we're seeing in all of that is the way they use our court systems to orchestrate this theater that they put forward that gives us a semblance of justice on the surface, but in fact is a corrupted sepulcher underneath.
Let me give you a little example of that corrupted. Did you say sepulcher?
Sepulcher.
Yeah.
Grave.
Grave. What do you call it? The coffin. And yes, it is. Here is the coffin of America when a dual citizen of Britain and America, Stephen Halper, controlled Christopher Steele through Orbis Business to create a fake dossier because Fusion GPS, after being paid $12 million for the first, people don't know this, I don't want to get into too many details, but there was a first examination of Trump from the FBI and from the DNC, and they found nothing. And so then they paid Fusion GPS to simply make up stuff. And that's where the dossier came from. They hired Christopher Steele. Christopher Steele was controlled by Stephen Halper. He was controlled by Sir Richard Dearlove. Sir Richard Dearlove was controlled by the head of the current MI5, MI6, and the Joint Intelligence Group. We know that. We've named all of them. It's been in the newspaper. I mean, in Britain, they know all of this. They're proud of it. They're proud they made George Papadopoulos, who was the target of 3 different frame-ups by Mifsud, who was probably dead because it was Mueller's activity created the death sentence for Mifsud, his number one Russian, the only real Russian named.
Can I interrupt you?
Yes, please.
Can I
Because
interrupt
I'm
you?
going to get
Because you are-
really get carried away over with this because I get so
well,
upset.
you have a grasp of these details like I don't know of anybody else that's got the grasp that you do, especially off the top of your head without notes. I mean, that's pretty amazing. But if you take what you're saying and look at another level up, what you're really describing is a group of very corrupt attorneys who feel their oats, feel like they're above the law. In fact, the evidence shows they are above the law. And we're seeing these corrupt attorneys keep pushing out these fake stories into the public awareness. And each one is an experiment to see if that story is going to work. And so what they kept doing with Donald Trump is they kept pushing out a new fake story every few months in order to try to figure out something that would stick. And this is very much, to my experience with the attorneys who represented Facebook. When they don't have the evidence, they go out and make it up. And that's their MO. Their MO is to make it up. So what does that say? That says our Department of Justice and our FBI and our court system itself are a part of this group of people who are determined to take power away from our republic, and they are going to use the mechanisms of the republic to make that happen. And so it's essentially lawyers who believe that sooner or later they can use the mechanisms of state, the mechanisms of the justice system to get what they want with their fake evidence if they just keep hammering away at it. That's what you're describing to me.
Oh, absolutely. And it is, in fact, the grand jury that they use. Let's use Andrew McCabe, the most guilty person you could possibly ever get. He controlled for 10 years the Uranium One Russia deal with Hillary, and then watched her get paid $145 million in front of his eyes, and then put a gag order. This was Robert Mueller, his boss, working through Andrew McCabe, controlling William Campbell Douglas, who wants to come forward. He's on his deathbed, but nobody wants to listen to a word he has to say because the Russians for 10 years controlled our uranium flow in this country. And that's another whole thing we've revealed, and I don't want to get caught up in, but you're right. It's the sepulcher. Now, the holiest order in the Catholic Church is called the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre. And what we're seeing here...
It wasn't my intention to draw the connection, but...
No, but it's right. The most holy thing we have here in America, justice that's supposed to maintain our Constitution and our civil rights, completely buried now in a monarchy of lawyers. These lawyers think they're above the law. Once they get appointed, why are they appointed? Why aren't they elected? And when they make bad decisions, why aren't they put in jail? They're putting other people in jail knowing that they're breaking the law. And our Department of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, why are they allowed to break every single law? In every single law, every single thing, that they charged Trump with, Robert Mueller did. Trump didn't do. There were 25 Russians accused. Let's look at the net gain of Robert Mueller's investigation. 25 Russians, actually 26. And 24 of them can never be contacted. They do exist, but the company that they said that they worked for had closed in 2014. They had nothing to do with the 2016 election. Those people have come forward in different countries and laughed at Mueller, pointed fingers at him. So the people working for Concord Catering all simply laughed. And the case of the owner, precaution against basically the United States, they're kind of winning that case. For example, they brought forth 1 million documents to say this is what your Concord Catering people did to affect our election. This is in the report, people. Mueller is not going to answer any questions about any of this. You're not going to get a single thing in any of his 4 testimonies. He's going to have nothing, 3 or 4. Nothing. You're going to get nothing that you already haven't seen because it's all garbage. If he pulls the garbage out, I mentioned the Russians, and I mentioned George Nader. You'd also have to mention the only Russian charged, Joseph Mifsud, who now, according to the lawsuit of Hillary Clinton against Mifsud and others, says that he's presumed dead. And his Russian handlers, the Italian
you're
intelligence...
saying Hillary Clinton filed a lawsuit against Mifsud? I didn't know that.
He was named as one of the people in a lawsuit for hacking the DNC.
Oh, I see.
It's a joke.
Well, that's a shifting...
It was a joke to tell the world that Mifsud is dead. Don't look for him. We also know that Mifsud came out and told other people different things. Papadopoulos wrote his book, which mentions all about Mifsud. You have Stefan Rowe, who was his handler and basically the billionaire who's married to a Russian woman who's the Russian contact who's trying to break into British intelligence. So British intelligence, Italian intelligence, Ukrainian intelligence, everyone but the Russians were involved. There was one Russian involved. His name was Ivan Timofeyev. He was a brand new friend of Joseph Mifsud who knew no Russian, but is accused of being the Russian who manipulated the entire thing, according to Mueller, from page 1 to page 448. The only person named of a crime is Joseph Mifsud. And he was named of the crime of basically saying that he had in his possession the 33,000 missing emails of Hillary Clinton that he was going to get from Ivan Timofeyev, a real Russian, by the way, who really lives in Russia and really does work for the Russians. And it was just a complete fluke. It was just it was the setup. Where were the 33,000 emails of Hillary Clinton going to come from that they were going to give to George Papadopoulos? That proves...
Isn't that in the FBI's files?
Correct.
Isn't that what Christopher Wray has?
Yes, and he's admitted it in testimony before the House. We know it because
so why do we keep talking about it? Why isn't somebody evaluating it and then telling us what's going on? Why do we keep hearing all of these vague statements? This is why it's easy to see now. This is all political theater. They don't want these ever out there. And that's what's disappointing as a member of Main Street who really wants our government to work. What we're seeing is game players to the nth degree who have learned how to use the mechanisms of state for their own private agendas and are leaving the rest of us trying to develop a country that actually works when we've got all these people inside that are sabotaging everything that we have in our country related to our Constitution.
In our face. Right in our face.
In our face, yeah.
Look at Nadler,
Publicly.
Look at Schiff, look at Cummings. They have done more witness tampering than I've ever seen in the entire congressional U.S. history. They have sat with Cohen. They have sat with Avenatti. They have sat with people for weeks. They're now sitting with the staff of Robert Mueller, not Robert Mueller himself, designing their questions so that they're not going to ask any questions. They're going to be leading questions, which of course are illegal. Someone should object to that. But they're going to say leading questions which indicate that there was obstruction. Now, let's stop for a second. Let's just hold the horses. There was no collusion, no corruption, no conspiracy, no anything with Russia and the Trump team. None. So how could there be any obstruction to that? Now, here's how they construct obstruction, and this is what the whole thing is going to be about. The fake testimony of Dan McGahn, who was simply trying to save his rear, and he was being manipulated. He admitted this. He basically admitted he lied because he was losing his house and everything. His entire life was ruined by Mueller, and Mueller wasn't letting up. The number one man he focused on, Dan McGahn. Dan McGahn was sent FBI agents again and again to basically set him up and attack him just like Flynn was.
Well, you know, Douglas, what your problem is.
I got a lot of problems. Which one?
You're using logic. You're using facts. And that's not what these people are about. These people are a bunch of attorneys who are sitting around continually concocting a story until something sticks. They keep believing that their stories are going to stick sooner or later. The fascinating thing is Trump appears to be Teflon Man to these lies, thankfully.
Yeah, he's Teflon Man, or he's rubber and they're glue. Because every
Yeah.
time they attack him, they show their hand. It's just unbelievable. They just show their hand. It's unbelievable that they witness tampered in such an overt way. I have never, but remember, who ever went to jail because of a congressional investigation? When did the Department of Justice, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA ever listen to the people on the Hill? It's political theater. So what we're going to see, we can predict. We've always been able to predict these things because it's so easy to predict. This is nothing more than the following. For those who are confused, especially once you start listening to me talking about where's Mifsud or why Alexander Downer gave so much money to the Clinton Foundation that keeps 95%. We know this. It's a fact. First off, they're invalid, all of their foundations, but they keep 95% of the donations. So the reality is Alexander Downer is trying to hide the fact that the $24 million that he gave from Australia when he was a bigwig there is the tip of the iceberg. He gave $84 million. I think I'm the only person saying this, but it's clear and the record's clear. I haven't pulled out the record, but I can tell you that I saw with my eyes the proof that he paid $84 million. And remember, the $145 million that Hillary got for Uranium One during Robert Mueller and Andrew McCabe's cover-up, which still goes on to this day, which is what one of the major, if not the major point of all of this. First off, let me just make this perfectly clear. When Comey couldn't destabilize Trump advancing in his candidacy, he committed 28 crimes of treason to try to stop him, to create October surprises in advance. But he blew it because he sprung all the October surprises early. And during that time, literally, we have enumerated the 25 real Russians that John McCain got along with the Senate Intelligence Committee. And we can go into, the treason of Richard Burr and Mark Warner and Dianne Feinstein and Daniel Jones, who then later created Penn Quarter Group that carried on the work of Fusion GPS. We can go into all those crimes. And we can enumerate all of them. But here's what happens. William Barr has to document every step that he takes. And every step that he takes, he has to deal with a person who's a senior executive service member, a bureaucratic establishment, shadow government, what people call the deep state. But it's not really. The deep state's international. The shadow government is right here in our country, and it's being controlled by the Brits. Now, what was it? The 13th special counsel investigation was, really, I like to call it the committee to impeach, who had infinite power with a grand jury to take, the evidence of Andrew McCabe. Where's the case, Judge Liu, for Andrew McCabe? Where's the case? Are you ever going to decide anything?
This is the game, Douglas. This is the game. The one thing I've learned in spades now is that these crooked attorneys, they love it when there's a lawsuit, because when the lawsuit is within their sandbox, they can control the outcome, and they will just drag out a lawsuit as long as it takes for everybody to get tired, for some new piece of evidence to come up that can allow them to exonerate the bad guys. They love it. They don't like it when it's out in the public like this is. But they like it when it's inside the court. So they love it when people file suits. And that's the other thing that we're noticing they do when they realize the public is not going to be satisfied unless there is a lawsuit, unless somebody is indicted, is that they will pick a scapegoat, and then they will try to force the public into being satisfied that one scapegoat can hide all the sins of the others. And that's what's the problem here. There have been so many people who have been bad for so long. The question is, who do you go at first? And boy, I'm sure hoping that Barr is up to this challenge, because there are a lot of extremely evil people involved with this attempted takedown of our republic.
Well, we have to remember exactly what you just said. And I would call it, these are demagogues in their own courts. Once you get it in the court and you got the judge in your pocket, you know the decision no matter what happens. That's the way it's going to go. That's the way it is, right. And we all know that. And we know that with the Supreme Court justices also. except that some of them are now becoming turncoats and turning far to the left. But now let's just go focus on what I was trying to say, because I've left many threads dangling. And one of the threads is that the special counsel is, in fact, supposed to create the evidence to impeach Trump. They did not. It failed. Mueller is a failure. He could not bring forth the evidence. This is the last-ditch attempt. And what did Nadler, the most evil man in this thing right now, what did he say? Oh, he believes that the Mueller testimony will be a dud. Now, he has been coaching the Mueller team for weeks and weeks. So when Mueller goes in, he already knows the questions. He already knows what's going to be said by the Dems. He's been coached. That's illegal. That's called witness tampering. So, but it's happened many, many times already in this case. Schiff has done the same thing, but he's going to simply pick up what Nadler has done, and so has Cummings. So the three people leading this charge are supposed to find impeachment. Because why? Because the Crossfire Hurricane was supposed to create the evidence, because the dossier had no evidence. The dossier, and remember, Crossfire Hurricane started in March of 2016 at the same time that the dossier was being created. Carter Page, George Papadopoulos framing are concurrent. That's what people don't understand. Barr may never know that. Believe it or not, Barr can only look at certain documents that he can then document. If he sat and talked with me, he would have to just ignore all of it. I could point him in the exact directions. We could show him the exact evidence. He would not be able to take that, because an investigation cannot be led by an outside document that it has not been verified. That's why the dossier is completely the sinking boat for them, except we have always pointed out the dossier is not going to be used. National security letters are going to be used.
When new evidence comes up, it can be verified and used going forward.
They control all evidence.
I'm not sure what you meant by that.
They control all evidence. Look, they're not even going to tell us that Joseph Mifsud was interrogated before Robert Mueller even started the special counsel. And we know that because he was invited to America by the only time he was here was when the Department of State invited him to come, and he was actually part of a conference. And they investigated him, and there were witnesses to it, and everyone talks about it. So we know that the special counsel was founded long before it was appointed by Rosenstein, whom no matter who was appointed. And then Rosenstein expanded the parameters of that investigation to be the most ridiculous special counsel investigation in history. And first off, special counsel investigations need to be thrown out. Grand juries need to be thrown out. No civilized nation uses them. That is where truth goes to die, and where the elite are protected in courts that are already rigged. Now, if they don't get tomorrow and the days after, through Mueller's investigation, his what he has to say to the Congress, if they don't get something to sink their teeth in, it's okay, because Mueller split up the special counsel into 17 separate charges, most of which went to the Southern District of New York, some went to the D.C., some went to Virginia, and these concurrent cases are going to rule what he says tomorrow, which means he doesn't have to say anything. Plus the grand jury rule, anything to do with any grand jury evidence, the evidence he gathered was enough to put all of the 500 people minus the Republicans, which was probably, 30 or 40 people who he harassed. We know every person he harassed who was a Republican. We don't know anybody he investigated or interrogated who was a Democrat. None. But we know that the people on the Mueller investigation handled the dossier first through Victoria Nuland and the State Department. We know that they knew it was fake. We knew the FBI knew it was fake, that Bruce Orr knew it was fake. Everyone knew it was fake. Everyone knew it had 6 different sources, starting with the FBI and Cody Shearer with the DNC, and then it went to, the wonderful Glenn Simpson and his wife, who say they wrote big parts of it, and then they merged it with the FBI investigation, then they merged it with what they had from the CIA, which was that's where the PP document came from. John Brennan, a good friend of Joseph Mifsud, Robert Mueller, John Brennan and Mifsud were buddies because they worked for Saudi intelligence at the time that the Riyadh bombing happened. Remember, John Brennan is a secret Muslim. And Mifsud is not a Russian, but he's named in the Mueller investigation as the only Russian. And now they think he's dead. And so what are you going to do? You got the other 24 Russians, 12 of them who worked for Concord Catering, who say that they didn't work in 2016. It was closed in 2014. You got a catering company trying to defend that they are not the IRA, which is Concord Catering is not the IRA, which is being charged, the Internet Research Agency. And then you got 12 GRU Russian agents who are being charged, who probably John Brennan got those names when he went to Russia before all of this, just when it was starting in March. He went to Russia unannounced and met with people he shouldn't have met with. And then he sent people to Italy, he sent people to Britain, and they set up the frame up so that in March, George Papadopoulos and Carter Page, the second that they got close to the Trump team, were already set up and framed because they knew that Trump could win.
There enters a what do I call it? The black hole of this evidence, and that is when George Papadopoulos was in London, he started working for that Center for Law Practice, and that's where he met Arvinder Simbai, who was one of the founders of that organization. What was the actual name of that?
The London School of Diplomatic International.
No,
well, there's like three of them. He had the London School of Diplomacy. There was the LIPAC or whatever it was. Anyway, there are four of them.
London International Law Practice.
There you go.
Anyway, that was the one where he met with Arvinder Simbai, who we now know was a senior Crown prosecutor who worked with Mueller, starting with the London, the bombings of the American embassies in Tanzania and Libya. She was the FBI's representative in London. And then she also represented the FBI in London after 9/11, where she and Mueller actually falsely accused Lofty Racy of training some of the terrorists, when in fact many years later he was completely exonerated, and therefore the conclusion was that Mueller and Arvinder Simbai falsely prosecuted him. And there's no evidence that they've been held accountable or sanctioned for that false prosecution. And so now we have her associated with George Papadopoulos, advising him to go to London to meet with Joseph Mifsud. So what does that say? It's obvious that the British were directing traffic relative to Mueller and this fake dossier. It's obvious. So why hasn't any of that come up? That's what I want to see Mueller asked about, is his relationship with Arvinder Simbai and the Crown Prosecution Service.
Herr Mueller, can you tell us about the dinner with Orrs?
Right, and with the other one, Alison Saunders, who was the chief Crown prosecutor, obviously worked with Arvinder Simbai, and she shows up 5 days before the Trump Tower meeting, having a private dinner with Bruce and Nellie Orr. I mean, hello, and none of that's come up? Why hasn't any of our congressmen asked about it?
And the State Department let Natalia Veselnitskaya, a known Russian agent, come into this country with a special visa over the Magnitsky Act, which is all fake. That's how we're protecting Bill Browder, who pays no taxes in America and is now a Brit but works in Russia and steals from Russia. So what we have here is just corruption. Every time money flows, there's so much corruption. And so to keep track of it is a little bit complicated. But if you just follow the sins of perdition, the 7 deadly sins, you can follow these people quite clearly. And what I want to point out is that Mueller's investigation, sorry, Buster Brown, it failed. Why? Because Trump is innocent. You couldn't, you know that John Brennan paid $100,000 to Sergei Millian, who now is out front and acts like he's a normal person, constructs this kind of family suburban life and says, I'm a normal person. His last name is Poroshenko. He is a Russian asset for the FBI, and he searched Russia until he found the PP tape. But it wasn't of Trump. I've seen that tape, and it's pathetic and disgusting. No one could possibly associate that with Trump. But that's what they had. They had the Victoria Nuland receiving a call from Ukraine stating that someone in Estonia said that Russia had compromising material on Trump. That's how it all started. And when they had that, that was the story they needed, because there was no evidence anywhere else. And they'd already looked everywhere, and they'd looked under every single stone, found nothing. Trump is innocent as can be. He's just, a braggadocious, egotist, a capitalist who we love. Because why? We needed that in this country. We needed America to be first. Sorry, the rest of you, sorry, you got to get in line, but that's the way that it is. And so what we're seeing here is that Mueller's investigation is a complete failure. And if they do not get him to say something compromising, and the reason they know every single question that the Dems are going to ask, and they're not going to ask many, that he already has them, which taints that investigation. But we know that you can lie before Congress by law. Mueller knows that. He helped create it with his good friend, Professor J.C., whose name I'm not going to say because he doesn't deserve to have his name to be said out loud. We'll just call him the Dark Professor. But anyway, his teacher, the Dark Professor, Mueller, made sure that there are laws in place so that he can lie before Congress, and that's not a problem. So he's going to lie, and he's going to lie a whole lot. Matter of fact, I suggest to you that almost every word out of his mouth will be a lie, or at least it will be predicated, or it will be set up and framed in a way that it's a lie. Because what we really need to ask...
Well, the Democrats who are rehearsing obviously know it's going to be a lie. That's why they're rehearsing. You have to rehearse lies in order to keep your story straight.
Exactly, and that's what it's all about. And they wanted it all to be behind closed doors. Why? So then they could leak what was behind closed doors with wrong interpretations, adding words and subtracting words, and putting words into Mueller's mouth. That's the reason he doesn't want to do any closed doors, but he's going to do one, I think. And so what's going to happen is he's going to shut up. He's not going to plead the fifth, because he was employed by us. He should have been fired, and the money should be demanded back, because there should have been no investigation. The second that it was constructed, he should have said, there is no crime here. I cannot do an investigation when I am trying to create a crime and continue the committee to impeach the president. And so Comey and Brennan and Clapper, everyone except Admiral Rogers, who tried his best and he got out, but everyone who was at the top, who were the appointees over those agencies by Obama, they were so thrilled because the 10,000 SES members below them, senior executive service members, took their orders beautifully because they got the same orders because it came directly from Obama's war room, which was led by who? The mafia boss of Chicago. And that's who he worked for years. That's who Michelle worked for years. And literally, if you follow the tracks of Obama, you see the Chicago mob move to D.C., and it's just so disturbing because when you see what they did by weaponizing all the intelligence agencies against Trump, and yet they still couldn't get a crime. They couldn't even invent a crime. But it was supposed to be an October surprise. There was supposed to be no crime, no investigation. Why? Because there's no crime. So it was supposed to just be an insinuation, an innuendo, an October surprise to knock him out of the race. It didn't work. It worked the reverse. Because we know the 17 intelligence community agencies have never agreed on anything, let alone that Trump worked with them to meddle in the election. Nonsense. Not one speck of evidence. There's a ton of evidence that the Democrats and Hillary and John Podesta worked hand in glove with the Russians. They are Russian communists through and through, but they're also Chinese communists through and through. And they're kind of a special breed, but they're going to get eaten up by China. And that's the reason that Hillary runs her operations out of Shanghai now. So when we look at what Mueller's doing, for the 12 years that he was the head of the FBI and during the years that Comey was there, what we really saw was absolute lawlessness, complete corruption, and you saw that the bombings that you just mentioned in Africa, and then the bombings of Riyadh, and then the bombings in Oklahoma, and then the first bombing of the trade towers, and then the real bombing of the trade towers, and the attempted bombing, and the bombing of the Pentagon, and the attempted bombing that went down in Pennsylvania, those are all in a sequence. Those are all the bombings of Robert Mueller. They're the same exact footprint. And it's all covered up from the inside.
Right, and it's amazing how many times our vendor Simbai came up, and this is public information, so it would seem that he can't avoid being asked questions about that since it's public information. And the other curious thing about his association with her is every time there was a FBI press release about her involvement, they changed the spelling of her name, which is really odd. It wasn't a lot. It was enough to be noticeable. And those are the kind of questions that I hope somebody's going to ask.
Well, remember when Trump said, well, we're not going to go through with this. And we all said, it's British Gate, it's British Gate, it's Crown Gate, it's the British attacking us. The revolution, the American Revolution isn't over, Mr. President. Fight it, fight the Brits, fight the Brits. Here's the deal. The Brits only have one single lifesaver, and it's called America, and a bilateral deal with Trump. And if that doesn't happen, they don't exist. They simply will be swallowed by the EU. It's as simple as that. And we know that because George Soros is putting everything on the line for this. Lord Malik Brown and Jeffrey Patty, all of them, the Privy Council, are so nervous. And Boris Johnson, remember, Boris Johnson had his arm around George Papadopoulos, saying that he was a bigwig for Trump. He was part of the setup. He was part of the frame-up. Don't think for one second that Boris Johnson is going to be good. Boris Johnson is part of the opposition, but now he knows which way the wind is blowing. And remember, these people do not care that one day they say one thing and the next day they say something else. They go like the Jesuits, like the Vatican, like the Pope, with the winner. They always choose the winner, right? And if they don't, then they simply change sides. And that's what goes on with all of these people. Except for Robert Mueller. Robert Mueller's trying to defend the tradition of total criminality in the District of Columbia. He is the ultimate fixer. We used to call Comey, the ultimate fixer for the White House. But really, when it comes down to it, the guy who set up the rules of what is evidence and what is not evidence, how he tricks people to say, give me the exculpatory evidence that proves that you're innocent, and then he disallows it. In every case, all the way back to when he was in California and when he was starting his career as a lawyer in the Justice Department, he did nothing but set it up.
We also have to keep in mind that Mueller is now in control of several of the certificate authorities for digital keys for the Internet, along with Hillary, Entrust, Cloudflare, and also Michael Chertoff. We're talking about people who have the literal keys to all of our communication. And somehow the back of this corruption needs to be broken. So hopefully we're seeing that, and we're not going to go back to the state of affairs as they have been for our entire lifetime.
Well, I was very encouraged when I heard the demon-spawn Nadler say, Mueller's investigation or Mueller's testimony is going to be a dud. He said that. The guy who has already witnessed tampering, who has witnessed tampered more than anyone, who said that he has the evidence, who says that the second part of the report of the 448 pages of garbage states that there is obstruction. Remember, that is one-sided. It only has Dan McGahn's side. It doesn't have Trump's side. You don't connect them. If you had the two of them sitting together in a real court case instead of a grand jury where it's all rigged, you would simply see that Dan McGahn would say, I have been manipulated because I've lost my house, I'm losing my family, I'm losing everything, I'm in debt, I will never be able to pay my bills. That's what happened to everyone that he focused on, Robert Mueller. And look at Joseph Mifsud. He's supposed dead now. This was supposedly the Russian. And the Russian was supposed to have Hillary's emails. And if they could just get George Papadopoulos to take that jump drive, for God's sake, instead of the 4 honeypots that Mifsud, Halper, and Downer and the rest of them set him up with, he went for the girls, and he married one of them. It's just amazing. He married Mifsud's frickin' secretary. And I love this. The FBI, before Papadopoulos, remember, Papadopoulos' Crossfire Hurricane started in July of 2016, but they didn't apprehend him and question him until February of 2017. And then he still didn't know he was under investigation. Why? Because they needed the wiretap to be open. And so they used him continuously. And he really had nothing to do with Trump. But anyway, the point is that's why they did that. And he had a Mifsud's handler, Simone Mangirante. Sorry, she was Mifsud's secretary. He didn't even know where she came from. And the only person who ever connected Mifsud with a Russian was a woman who was a Russian spy who came and joined his office after he was given a fake, title, Mifsud, there in London. And what did she do? She set him up with the Valdi discussion group, and he went there once he went to Russia and actually didn't speak Russian. And yet he's the Russian who arranged everything with the dossier, the billions of dollars of oil deals with Carter Page, the transfer of information in Czechoslovakia with Cohen, all this complicated, really garbage. All garbage. Franklin Furor's ridiculous nonsense about the Trump Towers paying Alpha Bank. Nonsense. So I'm just so upset that it's going to be exactly as we know it's going to be, and I'm going to still have to watch every word of it just in case there is something that's said. So, Michael, that's my kind of, I'm laughing, but because nothing's going to happen. But at the same time, it's kind of a dud. But what do you think's going to happen?
Well, what I hope happens is that we as a country stand up and insist that our elected officials stop this nonsense, and that we recognize very clearly what we're seeing with all this political theater, and that our law enforcement, and recognize that our law enforcement has to be completely regrouped, reorganized, maybe reformed. But what we do know now is that the FBI has been a part of the Five Eyes operation since March 5th of 1946. And the FBI was tasked with organizing sabotage in our country. So what we see is that Robert Mueller is just the last of a long line of individuals, probably starting with J. Edgar Hoover, who used the mechanisms of power within our government and within our law enforcement to do whatever they wanted. And so what they've done, FBI is clearly a part of this group of Five Eyes organizations that has been involved with supporting the 100-year plan of Cecil Rhodes to bring America back into the British Empire fold, and then they would create this new form of British federalism that would essentially use America as the police force for a world government. That's really clear what's going on here, and that Mueller has been a part of that. So I guess it's not surprising then that that group of people would put him up to attempt to take down Donald Trump, who clearly has not agreed to go along with this agenda. So hopefully the sins of the Son and the sins of the Father will be exposed by this testimony, and those that have chosen to be on the dark side will be exposed, and that somehow this can be used for some sort of constructive purpose going forward, and that we can get our republic or achieve the republic that we have thought we've had, clearly we have not had, and that our law enforcement and Department of Justice and Department of State will be reorganized as a result of this testimony.